Well, let's turn in our thoughts and our hearts to the theme at hand this morning, which is the theme of marriage. We're continuing our family life series right now, and we've been on a track of parenting, and now we're going to shift gears into talking about parenting for the next few weeks. Proverbs 24:30 says this, "I went past the field of the sluggard. Thorns had grown up everywhere. The ground was covered with weeds, and the stone wall was in ruins." I was reading that verse the other day, and it reminded me of something that we all know to be true, that sometimes you can tell the condition of a person's heart and life by their property. Have you ever noticed that? There are instances where you can read into people as you're driving by their home. That's what the proverb is saying here. You can tell whether someone who's lazy lives there or not. You can tell whether they have an eye for beauty or not. You can tell whether they believe that dandelions are a flower or a weed. As we all know, dandelions are very clearly a weed, but you can tell that when you drive by. Sometimes you can tell whether they're happily married or not. Driving home, there's this particular house I've been driving by that made me think of this proverb. And it's a house where the lawn is overrun with weeds. The window shades are almost always pulled shut tight. The paint around the windows is chipping. There's a weariness, even a sorrow about the property itself, as though it were telling a sad story. And then I found out the other day that indeed it was telling a sad story, that the family that lived there was falling apart. The husband has left. They're divorcing, and no more heartbreaking a story could be told than this. Because there was a time when that husband and that wife sat around a table and signed papers about this house, sat down with a real estate agent, and they happily signed papers that now this was going to be their house. And there was a time when the man was running a lawnmower over that lawn, and his wife was maybe planting flowers along the sidewalk, and maybe their children laughed as they ran through the sprinkler. And there was a time when the window shades were pulled up gladly, proudly, light poured out from inside. But now that property casts an emptiness, an innocence lost, a beauty marred. Someone once said, with every divorce, a small civilization is destroyed. The marriage between a man and a woman has been called the essential relationship. Of all possible relationships that exist in the world, the relationship between a parent and a child, the relationship between a brother and sister, between a teacher and student, between a governor and his or her citizens, a general and his soldiers. Of all these relationships, the primary relationship, the most foundational, essential relationship, is that between a husband and a wife. Maybe you've heard it said, as goes the family, so goes society. And that is true, but the statement is incomplete, because as goes the marriage, so goes the family. And when Jesus sought to find a relationship with which to compare the relationship that God had with His people, of all these relationships He could have chosen to compare it to, what did He choose? He chose marriage. Jesus called Himself the bridegroom and His church the bride. And one day, we get to sit around and enjoy a wedding feast in the coming kingdom of our Lord. So this morning, as we continue now with our family teaching series, and we begin to explore what makes for a healthy marriage, I want to repeat what I said with the parenting messages, just as with those messages. If you're not married this morning, don't think that these talks are not for you, because you're going to hear ideas and principles that you'll be able to apply into your own life and relationships. Maybe one day you'll be married. And don't forget, your life is impacted by the quality of all the marriages around you. You don't live in a vacuum. And so it's important that we take a periodic refresher course and revisit some of these teachings that the Bible gives about marriage. And as with the parenting message, we are going to focus on, these next few weeks, God's ideal for marriage, the target God sets for us in His Word, the will that He has for us. Now, not one of us hits that bullseye perfectly. We're all too sinful and selfish for that. And some of us have gotten nowhere near the target. Maybe marriage for you fell far short of that ideal. Maybe because of things you did or failed to do, or through no fault of your own. It was because of things that were done to you, things that you never saw coming. or that you tried to fix, but it just never happened. If that's you, as we begin this series, I sincerely, and I said this with the parenting part, I want you to feel the embrace of God's grace over you as we go through this series. We're going to keep God's ideal in front of us. We're going to look at the target. We're going to say, shoot for that. But even as we do that, if these moments come along where shame or guilt or sadness draws near, I just want you to dive into the river of God's forgiveness and mercy and grace and His steadfast love for you. As a father shows compassion to his children, so the Lord shows compassion to those who fear Him. For He knows how we're made. He knows what we struggle with. He knows our history. He knows our past. He knows all about us and loves us anyway. So with that condition in place, we'll step forward. Nod your head if you agree with that understanding. So, this morning we simply want to ask the question, why is marriage the essential relationship? Why is it so powerful and so important? Where did God come up with this crazy idea for organizing the human race? Just as with the parenting series, we went all the way back to Genesis 1 and 2. And guess what? That's where we're going for this teaching. Straight back to Genesis chapter 2 for our answers and the beautiful story of God creating Adam and Eve. And according to the creation account, most of us know that, God first creates Adam, puts him to work in the Garden of Eden, not a bad start to his life, to his existence. And everything God had created up to that point was what? Was good, the Bible says. Stars, sun, earth, seas, animals, vegetation, all of it was good. But here God saw something that was not good. Genesis 2:18 says, the Lord God said, it is not good that the man be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. And this is where God creates Eve. And it points to our first teaching point this morning. And I want you to write this down. Why does God give us marriage? Well, He gives us marriage for companionship because it provides us with a helper. I will make a helper suitable for Adam. Well, what do you need marriage for to give you that? A simple pet can give you that, can't it? Oh, you should have seen Callie. I got to get this picture for you. I've been watching Caitlin as she's moved into the pros, and Callie was right up to the TV as Caitlin was doing her thing. It was so cute. Isn't that companionship of a pet, a goldfish, a dog, isn't that enough? Well, in the next part of the story, if you know Genesis, you know that's not enough, because what does God do with Adam? What's his first assignment? God brings all the animals into the garden and gives Adam the assignment of what? Naming them. So he's looking them over. He's examining them. He's studying them. He's the first scientist. But after naming all the animals, the Bible says, but for Adam, no suitable helper was found. There's that word again. What does it mean? Sounds like what Adam needs is a housekeeper or a visiting nurse or maybe a roommate. So we better find out what the word means. Whenever you're reading the Bible, don't assume you know what you're reading. Sometimes you can figure it out, but so there's always these three steps that we teach people to use when you're reading the Bible to help you grasp its meaning. Step 1, observation. Ask the question, what do I see? So you're reading the passage and you're looking for things that seem important, things that are repeated. The word helper is repeated twice. That stands out. After observation then, let's not assume we know what it means. What do you want to do next? What's the second step? Interpretation. Where we ask the question, what does it mean? Here we have to roll up our sleeves a little bit, do a little homework, do a little study. And if you look up that word in a commentary or a Bible dictionary or go to one of the internet tools like BibleHub.com, you'll find out that the Hebrew word that's used there, and you can do this with a click of a button, is ezer. It means helper. It's used 21 times in the Old Testament. And if you were to skim those verses, you'd discover that 16 out of the 21 times that it's used in reference to God as our helper. Verses like these. Psalm 33:20, we wait in hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. So here we learn that to be a helper is to be a defender. This is not a roommate or a housemate. Psalm 70, verse 5, I am poor and needy. Come quickly to me, O God. We just sang the song, I need thee. Oh, I need thee. You are my help and my deliverer. So to be a helper is to be a deliverer, someone who raises up the fallen. Psalm 121, verse 1, love this verse. I lift up my eyes to the hills. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I mean, clearly, we're talking about someone who is much more than a bowling buddy or a pickleball partner here. And when we add this little bit of interpretative work into our study, what we learn is that helper, in the biblical sense of the word, is this. It's someone who can meet us at the point of our deepest needs and longings. If Adam is to have his loneliness taken care of, then he needs someone like himself who can meet him at every level of his being as an equal. This helper will need to be able to relate to him in every way. And that's what Eve was for Adam. That's what a husband or wife ought to be for their partner. And this is why marriage is a good thing. It provides this type of companionship. And because of this companionship of marriage, with a husband and wife helping each other, meeting each other at the point of their deepest needs and longings, they are able to do greater things and experience greater things than they would on their own. John Maxwell said that oxen illustrate this. I don't know if he wrote it in a marriage book. It doesn't sound like a marriage principle, but turn to your spouse if you're here and say, "You old ox, how you doing?" But John Maxwell says, if you have an ox that says pulls a half ton and you hitch him up to an ox that pulls another half ton, how much weight do you think they'd be able to pull together? Well, just simple mathematics, you'd say, well, they could pull a ton then. But come to find out, and I don't know if these figures are exact, but when you hitch them up together, they can pull a ton and a half, exponentially more than they would have been able to do otherwise. That's the power of having an easer. And that's what God intends to happen in marriage. It propels you, it ought to propel you far beyond where you'd get to on your own. In biblical mathematics, then, 1 + 1 is greater than 2 if both are helping each other. And I can vouch for this. My marriage to Janice has allowed me to experience things that are undeniably greater, far greater than I'd ever have been able to do on my own, beginning with Hannah, our daughter. I have been given a front row seat to fatherhood. And I've seen so much more of the world because of Janice. I'd never been east of Chicago before I met this New York girl. And she introduced me to the whole eastern half of the continent, which up till then I thought was nothing but a concrete jungle, because that's how I saw it depicted on Welcome Back, Kotter, if you remember that show. Figured that everything east of Chicago was just a wall of concrete. Janice showed me otherwise, how beautiful it all was, especially New England and the ocean. And then we discovered England together, and then I introduced her to the western side of the continent, Yellowstone and the Tetons, and then later on, with Hannah's help, we discovered California and New Zealand, and soon Switzerland beckons. Janice has expanded my cultural horizons. A couple weeks ago, we went to Kennedy Center and saw the musical Funny Girl. Meh. Truly, we both went, eh. But if it wasn't for Janice, I never would have discovered the majesty of Les Miserables. Can I get a witness? Or the soul-stirring of Wicked. Or the spectacle of Phantom of the Opera. Or the wonder of Hamilton. Or the simple joy of Mamma Mia. I wouldn't have heard the one line in Funny Girl that has stayed with me. When the mother of Fanny Bryce, who's struggling in her marriage to Nick because she's been smothering Nick, and mom sings to Fanny, "You should love him less and respect him more." And I cried out in the theater, "That'll preach!" And they escorted me out of the theater after that. But when you're begging for something to hang on to. In a book called The Case for Marriage, authors Linda Wade and Maggie Gallagher write this. We'll go to the next slide. Married people have more satisfying sexual lives. This is, again, like some of the books we've referenced. These are secular sociologists who have studied, in this case, marriage in a great depth, and they've learned this. Marriage people have more satisfying sexual lives. They live significantly longer, healthier, happier lives. They recover more quickly from illness. Marriage protects men and women from suicide and mental illness as well. They earn more money. They advance more quickly in their jobs. Even marital nagging can be positive because the person has a greater reason beyond self-interest to change behavior. Now, don't run away with that thought. There's more. Research does not show these benefits for cohabiting relationships. When people marry, when they commit to the relationship, that person's well-being and the other person's well-being becomes inextricably linked. So it is in their best interest to see that their spouse does well. And their research was found to be true in 17 countries. All these findings were borne out, confirming what the Bible said about marriage from the very beginning, that in marriage, God helps ease our aloneness by giving us a helper. So observation, interpretation. What's the final step of proper Bible study then? Application. What are you supposed to do with this? Well, if you're married, how are you doing? Ask yourself this. How am I doing with being an easer, a helper to my spouse? Marriage, when it's working right, is a workshop of love where God is sanding us down and chiseling away the selfishness in us. Or it's a laboratory of love where two mad scientists are inventing things, creating things, inventing things, developing new character, discovering new parts of themselves. Yes, dear. Yes, dear. That's what marriage can be. Even if you're not married, if you're married to Christ, if God is your Ebenezer, that's a word. If you've experienced God's help over and over again, then you are called to tamp down your selfishness and to learn to live for more than you and learn to serve others. And the church then becomes your laboratory of love, your workshop of love, where you learn to be an easer for others. Woohoo! Drop the mic. Go marriage. Go easer. You called your spouse an ox earlier. Call him, hey, easer. Not geezer. Don't say that. All right, a second reason, right there in Genesis, that comes across in the Genesis story is this. God gives us marriage for consummation. It is the proper place to express my sexuality. The way God designed us, marriage is the proper place for sexual expression. The author of Hebrews says, the slide before that. There it is. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and the adulterous. Sex is for the marriage bed. So if you're not married, you're not to be in that bed. Obviously, God takes this very seriously. After perusing the animal kingdom, looking for a helper, Adam doesn't find one. So God, if you know the story, performs divine surgery on Adam, pulls out one of his ribs, creates Eve. I love the story. I probably shared it with you before, so forgive me if I did it. The little girl goes to Sunday school class, hears that story for the first time, and Mom asked her, what'd you learn in Sunday school today? And the little girl was, it was so cool. God, I found out how God made Adam and Eve. God took out Adam's brains and made a woman out of him. And all God's ladies nod their heads whenever I tell that joke. Yep, that's how it goes. And then after creating Eve, God presents her to Adam. You could say that God is performing the first wedding here. In Genesis chapter 2, he walks Eve down the aisle. And when Adam sees her, he's ecstatic. He composes a sonnet. He sings a song. It's a song in there. He writes a musical, Genesis, the musical, to express his happiness, where he says, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And the words in the Hebrew language just ring with enthusiasm. This is not monotone. This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. He's like Marv Albert calling a basketball game and seeing a 30-foot shot and goes, yes! That's Adam when he sees Eve. And then in the story, the writer Moses pauses to offer his commentary on what's just happened. And let's show that this next slide from Genesis. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. The man and the woman were both naked, and they felt no shame. And it's in those words, one flesh, where Moses is making reference to the sexual unity between a husband and a wife. According to biblical mathematics, 1 + 1 is 1 when it comes to our sexuality. Every other time and place and form of sexual expression brings shame, brings confusion, but not here. This is where it belongs, in marriage between a husband and a wife. And see what these astonishing verses teach us, a little tutorial about what we should think about sex. Write some of these ideas down. We don't have slides for these, but first of all, sex is God-given. It's God-given. Sex is God's idea. Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created him. I've read evolutionists who don't believe in God, and they can't figure out what to do with gender and sexuality. It makes no sense from an evolutionary perspective. It's too clunky. But our sexuality is part of God's design and plan. And folks, too many Christians have just, talk about clunky, have done a lousy job communicating a holistic and healthy view of sex to others, especially to their children. It's the elephant in the living room that nobody talks about. It's shrouded in secrecy. Sex is Voldemort in a church, that which shall not be named. It's cloaked with shame. It should be cloaked with modesty, but not shame. Our kids should grow up knowing that who they are as a boy or girl is part of God's wonderful design. And they can be proud of being masculine and feminine. They shouldn't feel shame about it, and certainly not confusion. These changes their bodies are going through, these attractions that they're starting to feel and ought to feel for the opposite sex. It's how God made us to be. It's God-given. And because our sexuality is God-given, secondly, it's good. Because there's so much sexual sin, though, in our culture, the church too often over the years has made it sound, directly or indirectly, as if sex is the problem, is the evil thing, but it's not. What's the problem? It's this. The sinful heart that loves to take the good gifts that God creates and mangle them into a twisted heap that looks nothing like the original gift. But sex and sexuality and gender, that God made us male and female, along with all the attractions and drives and emotions that go along with it. Oh, Romeo, Romeo! All of that is God firing on all cylinders. This is God at His creative best. Proverbs 30, verse 18 says, there are 3 things too wonderful for me, 4 I do not understand. The way of an eagle in the sky, the way of a serpent on a rock, the way of a ship on the high seas, and the way of a man with a maiden. And the reason all this occurs is because of a third thing these verses in Genesis tell us: sex is powerful. I mean, think of its power. It's powerful because of the pleasure the sexual experience brings. That's why every culture that has ever existed, going all the way back in time, has been tempted to worship in one form or another Eros, the goddess of sexual love. And it's the pleasure of Eros that makes it such a formidable foe for us to grapple with. But if you're a Christian, you must grapple with it. You cannot let yourself be mastered by this, or it will enslave your mind and corrupt your body. Always keep that verse in mind we shared last week. Do you remember it? 1 Corinthians 6:12, I will not be what? I will not be mastered by anything. Say that. I will not be mastered by anything. But on the other hand, sex has the power, if used rightly, to create this mystical, magical oneness between a husband and wife. It deepens the bond between them and gives life. And not only that, this is so powerful, it could even create life. I mean, something that can take your life, like a bullet, has to be powerful. But something that can create life, oh my goodness. How much more powerful is something that can actually create life? And we've all met couples, haven't we, who've been married for years, and it's like they actually are one. There's a story of a woman who came into her bedroom once and found her husband foraging through the closet. "What are you looking for?" she said tenderly. "Oh, nothing," he replied. "Well, it's not there, it's under the bed." And he went and found what he was looking for. And I'll tell you what, Janice has, and I have had those moments. It's scary and it's wonderful all at the same time. What is that? It's the power of oneness at work. So why is marriage important? Why did God give us marriage? It's important for companionship, to find a helper. It's important for consummation. It's the place where I can express my sexuality. Finally, talking about creating life, marriage is important for what's often produced by our companionship and consummation. It's for children. It's the proper seedbed for raising a family. The third thing we see in Genesis about why God created marriage. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife. Where'd that come from? I thought we were just talking about Adam and Eve here. When did mom and dad get brought into the mix? Well, see, in God's thinking, marriage is all about the family. And if you want to have a family, then you get married first. And in God's mind, if you want to have sex, then you get married first because of what sex is designed to lead to. Up until 1960, in the general thinking of every human being on the planet, sex, marriage, and children was all thought together as one package. But then in 1960, something was invented that changed everything, and that blew up the package. And humans have wanted to blow up the package forever, but we couldn't do it until 1960. What was invented? And no, it wasn't the iPhone. That was last week. What was it? The pill. 1960 is when the pill was introduced. And finally, we had a way to peel off sex from the annoying, inconvenient consequence of children, which then allowed us to peel off sex from marriage, which then allowed us to throw away something else that had been annoying the sinful heart for thousands of years, God's boundaries for sex. Now at last, we can make marriage anything we want it to be. Now, a biblical case can be made for contraception, but that's not what we're going to talk about in this sermon. But what I want you to do in raising these sociological points is I want you to connect some dots here and do some bigger thinking than we ordinarily do. And to be able to understand how is it that we have come as a society to radically redefine in 60 years the definition of marriage from being a sacred covenantal relationship that God created to exist between one man and one woman till death do they part, for the sake of becoming a seedbed of the family. And as goes the family, so goes society. And as goes the marriage, so goes the family. How have we gone from that to what marriage has become today, an arrangement that has all to do with my individual happiness? And if something makes me happy, I can marry it. And if something stops making me happy, I can move on and marry something else at the drop of a hat. But sex and marriage and children is such a sacred package that in God's eyes, even those people who do not desire or intend to have children, the dinks. You've heard of the dinks? What are the dinks? Double income, no kids. That's a thing today. Nothing wrong with being a dink. We'll just call you that. No. There's nothing wrong with that. Or what about an older couple beyond the years of being able to raise children? They want to get married. Well, in God's thinking, even people like this who have no intent of raising children are to still honor the covenant of marriage before they join themselves together sexually, in honor to the God who created all this. Let marriage be honored by all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. Marriage is the seedbed for raising a family. And now, see, we have brought things we've pinned things right to as far as it can go, where now you can have sex without children, and we've even now created a way to create children without sex. But God's arrangement still is best. A decade ago, the Brookings Institute announced its findings from a major study that to escape poverty and join the middle class, you had to follow 3 or 4 simple rules. Some have called this the success sequence. First, you finish high school. Second, you get a job. Third, you wait till age 21 to get married. And fourth, then you have children. And according to the study, of those that follow that path, only 2% will remain stuck in poverty. We've been talking about parenting for the last couple months, and we know that parenting's hard work, so we know this is how it really ought to be. You should raise kids in tandem with mom and dad, husband and wife, who are absolutely committed to each other and to their children, and marriage is what provides that. You don't think parenting is tough? Go and listen to those messages. Or just somebody sent me this a week or two ago. I thought, well, the 5 irreversible laws of raising children. You want to know why parenting is hard? Number 1, the later you stay up, the earlier your child will wake up, yes. For a child to become clean, something else must become dirty. Toys multiply to fill any space available. The longer it takes you to make a meal, the less your child will like it. And backing the car out of the driveway will automatically cause your child to have to use the bathroom. Marriage is the proper seedbed for growing a family. And to a child, the love of mom and dad, not just the love of mom and dad for them, but the love that mom and dad have for each other, creates the safest, surest, most optimal environment for them to be raised in. And we've been watching now for more than a decade this radical experimentation on marriage and this great cultural push to redefine it. You pick and choose whatever arrangement you want. It's just as good as traditional marriage. There's nothing special about traditional marriage. And the bills are all coming due, and we can see with our own eyes that that's simply not the case. We can study single-parent households. We can see what easy divorce does to people. We can look at the effect of cohabitation and what happens in homes where a father is missing. We can see the damage it causes. And when the dust all settles, it's the traditional family and the traditional marriage that is still standing. What God said at the beginning of the age will still be true at the end of the age. And that's the power of marriage. The author of Hebrews is right. Let marriage be honored by all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled. And in honoring marriage in that way, and in so doing, we honor God, and we honor ourselves, and we honor the well-being of our society. We can't go back to the days of June and Ward Cleaver. Nobody wants that. I don't want a Janice running around just in skirts and aprons around the house. But we need to go back to a world where the ideal of one man, one woman, united for a lifetime in a relationship of oneness that will not be separated till death, where that ideal is upheld and reached for. And a church that is faithful to its Lord must hold the line on that bedrock, this essential relationship no matter what anyone else around us says.